on our last episode, we spoke to Professor Richard Wolff, and he, expressed some discontentment with how Bernie dropped out, some frustration that he is opposed to third-party runs for himself, at least in general, that he didn't try to shift his coalition in a way that could have, extracted leverage. Ultimately, the word of the day, the word of the year, the word of the century is leverage, 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 and the fact that we don't have any. When we talk about how we need labor unions, it's because we want leverage. When we talk about media and spectacle, it's because we want some kind of leverage. And when we talk about force to vote, it's because there did exist actual real power and leverage, despite the small numbers of socialists that we have, or progressives generally that we have. What is the attitude toward third parties, whether it's the Green Party or the Movement for a People's Party, and what should the left be doing to participate or encourage third parties as a potential way to extract leverage, which doesn't currently exist within the two-party system?
Well, I'll say that I think there is a place for third parties in the existing U.S., but it's at the local level, and it's largely in nonpartisan races, which actually, especially west of the Mississippi, I don't know why I'm sounding like I'm in the Oregon Trail or something like Western Mississippi. But in large chunks of the country, actually a lot of these local races are nonpartisan. So there's value and there's routes for third parties. Actually, Jabari Brisport, who just elected state senator in New York, he got his political training, or a lot of it, besides for his work with his teachers union and through DSA, through a run that was endorsed by DSA. For a Green Party for a race before he decided that, hey, the Green Party is kind of a dead end, or at least it was. I ran this competitive race with the Green Party, and now I'm going to do it through a Democratic primary with the same platform, and he won. But in other words, if the attitude of activists had been hostility to his first run, maybe we would have alienated and lost this great socialist state senator.
Yeah, he's in our first episode, by the way, for folks who missed that one.
But I think in general, what people in DSA see, and I'm speaking in the general term, because obviously an organization of this many people, there's a lot of different views, is what most Americans see, which is just simply a recognition of the reality of our political system and the fact that it can't be changed by will alone. My playbook of how I think politics should go is all about independent political action, and it's all about how in the world do we live in a society in which the majority class doesn't have a party to politically represent them. How do we live in a democracy where the majority class just isn't represented at any level, right? We have a business section in the newspaper. There would never, ever be, till maybe after the revolution, a labor, section of the
unemployed person.
No, the New York Times had a labor report until the 1970s. Believe it or not.
Until recently,
but he was the last major
3 or 4 years ago. Yeah.
But the New York Times doesn't currently have a labor report.
I don't think
not currently. No,
they've got like five meme reporters.
Yes. They had a lot of people looking for Bernie Sanders on microaggressions. That was the biggest thing. But
the body language specialists.
He's too Jewish.
But I think a lot of people just recognize that these third-party efforts are not really serious efforts in the sense that they can lead to something. I think there is a route potentially to a working-class party in the U.S., but that would come through. In other words, I think that's an outcome rather than something you start with. So imagine a scenario really quickly where we have this growing Democratic Socialist caucus in the within the Democratic Party, and you have increasing polarization, not just between Democrats and Republicans, but also polarization along class lines between those types of working class, economic, egalitarian Democrats and the corporate base of a lot of the Democratic Party. Then at the same time, you have a Trumpist versus kind of establishment Republican polarization developing. You might see the U.S. political system briefly fracture into a 4 or 5 party system or whatever, then recoalesce, unless there's institutional change, likely recoalesce into a different 2-party system, and maybe we'll be one of the 2 parties left standing. I think that's the only route that I could think of, that we get a Labor Party in our lifetime in the U.S.
So that's kind of a shortcut, but a mental shortcut, in that we're just sort of waiting for the catalyst for a realignment.
So Richard,
I mean, the only thing I want to add, because I want to answer Marie's question directly too about where DSA is. I mean, as I alluded to earlier, like DSA used to be blue no matter who. I mean, just being real. Like, and then it slowly became, more ecumenical. And so when I was the deputy director and we had to design a national endorsement policy, because as I always pointed out, we went from having our endorsements like rejected to like people asking us, how do I get endorsed? And we had never been asked that question in like 30 years. So I had to, and I remember, and one of the things I said in the enforcement process was like, we have to endorse one non-Democrat. Like, it can't just be all Democrats all the time. I think Jabari was the one that we endorsed nationally for that. And I think that it's this dichotomy where, maybe not dichotomy, but it's this the dance I brought up to where it's like DSA wants to be engaged in electoral politics as both an oppositional force to the establishment, but also not a marginal force, which is what that's so when the Greens. So what I to flesh out what I said about the Greens earlier, the Greens in New York City, in New York State, where we have fusion, where you can run on this, Jabari could run on multiple party lines. The Greens won't endorse Democrats, so Jabari couldn't run as a Green and a Democrat. And that puts DSA in this position where DSA can't endorse Green candidates because the person's likely running as a Democrat. So DSA then, what it does is, I'll be more snarky than Bhaskar, then DSA takes this like idealist position of like, well, we support this dirty break that will happen in some future time when like magic will, then when there's the alignments, the stars are aligned perfectly. And that's why I say, so it's like basically it provides ideological cover for that. We're just going to keep working as we always do. And then we'll work towards this time in the future that there'll be this moment that'll come, that could come. I'm not that.
Right.
That is
but what I want to
but-
know is what we're doing institutionally, individually to help that time come. So the argument that was actually made by Professor Wolf on last week's episode wasn't that let's invest in the Greens or MPP so that they win. We all know, I don't think any leftist in a conversation with another leftist, particularly folks who is learned and esteemed as this panel, needed explained to them that it is difficult for a third party to win in America, and that in fact we have a two-party system. Like I think that everybody understands that, including people who vote Green, like myself, right? But very famously, I am a Jill Stein voter.
Yeah, I heard that myself.
Same with me. I only voted for women for many, many years. I did McKinney and I did two Steins.
One of the proudest things I ever did in my life was I voted for Ralph Nader in the year 2000. And if I really want to get liberal Democrats going, I'll call myself out as a proud Nader 2000 voter.
Those are fighting words. Not me.
I'll tell you, the day I decided I was going to be exclusive and like boyfriend girlfriend with my last partner was the day that I discovered that he had also voted for Jill Stein.
Nice.
You were in 2016. I said, "Oh, okay, you're a diamond in the rough."
Now we can share everything.
But
there's a good time to preview next week's episode with, in fact, Ralph Nader, consumer advocate.
There you go.
537 listeners requested that.
but the argument that Professor Wolf actually made was, the point is you can get draw enough people away from the Democratic Party, that the Democratic Party has to start acting like European governments where they have to form consensus by making certain kinds of concessions, right? That's the argument, that if there were a credible third party threat that could peel off 3, 5, 10% of voters, then at a certain point, Joe Biden, whatever centrist is coming down the pike, is going to have to say, all right. We will agree to $2,000 monthly checks. We'll agree to Bernie's executive order, temporary Medicare for all program. We'll agree to some number of things in order for you to drop out of the race before Election Day. And funny story, I'm sure we'll talk about this about Ralph Nader. He apparently offered Al Gore like a list of 20 asks and said, give me 3 of them and I'll drop out. And Al Gore said, no, I'm not interested. And now here we are.
Never heard that, actually.
I believe that.
He only gave one, which was picking Joe Lieberman as the running mate. That was the only one he did.
Wise choice.
But he refused. So one was just wear a seatbelt, and he refused to do it because it's a violation of his natural rights.
But so why don't we think that way? Why don't we think there's any benefit to the threat of withholding our votes in an organized way? Isn't that basically what organized labor is doing in the similar context, saying we're going to deliver these votes to you if XYZ?
Because I think the argument that I would make to that, because I agree with you, let's all start with the basis that we know how society works and the limitations, and we can act in good faith, even though the podcast is called Bad Faith. I would say that DSA, groups like DSA, I'm not a DSA sectarian in that way, but like DSA serves as like the independent political organization that can withhold labor. I think with labor is really important, like the volunteer labor, withhold donations to a certain extent, but much more like withhold votes and withhold labor. And I think that you don't need a party to do that. And that's like my good faith answer to that, because I feel that, broadly speaking, I think you've seen third parties actually go down in strength over the past 20 years. I mean, since Perot's runs, I mean, and both right and left. Like, I'm just saying in general.
Sure.
And I think that society has also changed in a way that I feel that people are much more, and it goes back to the Ezra Klein interview with the handsome man on my right in my screen, Bhaskar, where there's like, we have strong polarization of the weak parties. And it's a really weird scenario where people are like, I'm a Democrat, but if you ask them, they've never donated to the Democratic Party. They've never gone to a Democratic meeting, but they are like, you can't shake that. They are like convinced that they're a Democrat. And it's like, so I think those are two issues, and I think we could have fair disagreements, but I think you can withhold votes by building independent political organizations. And I think the party sense also, like, I think it just culturally is like, for someone like me, is like, I'm not interested in joining another party. And I think there's enough people like me. What?
Why aren't you? Because the other argument is Americans are obsessed with electoralism. Americans only check in every 4 years. So it would seem to me that you could exploit people's political thirst and use the party structure to buy into that in a way that not the average Joe on the street might not necessarily want to join DSA. But look at what Republicans are trying right now with this new, whatever they're calling, Patriots Party or... Is that what it's called? Am I making that up?
Yeah, the Patriot Party.
Okay. That seemed like the natural name for such a thing.
I mean, I'll just give my 30-second answer to you is like, I feel like I can act as a political actor. That was kind of bad English, but I can like engage in the political sphere more effectively as like through an independent political organization that happens to be DSA, but it could be eventually could be my union. It was Our Revolution when I was staff there. Then building a party, and I would say that's both true for a new party, but also the Democratic Party, because I just feel that, and because I have an aversion to party politics, I generally feel that they're kind of weak, and I think like the best way is to be part of an outside organization. But I've spoken enough on this, so I want to take a step back.
One thing to say is that like we don't really have, in terms of party structure, even a two-party system. We have something closer to a no-party system, in that I would ask people, what are the barriers stopping you from running as a socialist in a Democratic Party primary, where a lot of the working class is, not all of it, obviously a lot of the working class just doesn't vote and isn't engaged. But what are the barriers stopping you? So some of the barriers are access to financing and things like that, but that can be overcome through small donors. Whereas if you are trying, yes, of course. But if you are also trying to run on a third party ballot line, your barrier is in part getting and maintaining the ballot line. So we would have been spending all our time in New York City, for instance, building and maintaining a socialist ballot line. Like even WFP spends most of their time, or not most of the time, a good chunk of their time maintaining a ballot line. So I think the one force in American society that has the possibility to really speed up this process is organized labor, deciding to strategically break with the Democrats or not invest its money and canvass its power in the Democratic Party. I think organized labor has the power to push a certain bargain with the party more aggressively. I don't think it necessarily would manifest itself in a different ballot line, but I think it definitely has the power to shift and realign the Democratic Party in a way that we don't as activists. Because the thing is, the base won't go with us if we do pursue even the effort of spending all our resources building ballot lines in 50 states.
You asked a really great question earlier about like, how do we do this? And I think like one thing to unite the three guests is like in our worlds is like I would advocate for, and it's something I want to like push forward more, is like people, rank and file union members who are socialists should get involved in their union's political action and like endorsement processes. Like, and this came to me when I went with Jabari. I went to a meeting with him where he had to speak to these union members, and I was like, "There's no DSAer there. There's no leftist there to like be like, we should actually endorse that guy. It tends to be more like the goody two shoes, the people who go along to get along. And I think that that's a real terrain of struggle where like you'd want to have workers there who are mobilized and like pushing for more progressive endorsements against the union leadership. And just something for people, your listeners, to think about. I think it's a real area of struggle that's being overlooked.